to the kind of peace which we were able to introduce across the continent was the Balkans. But since the European Union did not dispose of a strong enough credible threat backed up by military force, it could not stop on its own the Serb President Milosevic to end the sequence of wars in which he has
do you think that the inability of the EU to act as a comprehensive force in that particular instance has somewhat led to what some people consider a major division within the EU in terms of the war in Iraq and support of the war in Iraq?
Well, the Balkan wars should have had the effect to the contrary. No, the reason why the European Union as such had no position on the Iraq war, the differences are among our member states, some who followed the United States, others who opposed the agenda of the United States. But the European Union as such, because of the differences of the member states, was not there in the debate on Iraq as a European Union. We are now engaging as a European Union in the reconstruction process, but we had no European Union position on the war. So the war, in a way, not only divided or created dividing lines across the Atlantic, it created dividing lines across the European Union, across NATO, and some people add to this also across the Potomac.
Well, there are a lot of very complicated and interesting topics in terms of EU-US relations, as well as the internal division within the EU on these common fronts. Stay tuned for more information on these topics after this break.
Security, I think, is not always a given, which may have been something that we took for granted in the past.
To ultimately be the victor in the war against terrorism, we need all Americans to be engaged, down to the point where we ask mothers and fathers to think about doing some simple things at home to protect themselves and protect their children.
No terror that's even greater, not knowing if your children are safe, if your family's safe. Doesn't come worse than that.
People and your children understand that there is a plan.
Having these plans in place is just sort of common sense.
Establish like a communication plan, how to get in touch with each other.
You'll have a radio, you'll have a flashlight, you'll have batteries.
Make sure you have enough water and food.
You have your basic essentials that you would need in everyday life.
You will have done something to prepare. You were in control. You had a choice. We're asking America to be ready.
People will pull together and people will make it through this.
Hi, I'm Whitney Belker, and welcome back to Miami's Global Connection. Ambassador Burghardt, we were talking about the recent division within the EU in terms of support for the war in Iraq. For example, Spain and the UK were in support of the war, France and Germany not so much in support of the war, and some have criticized the lack of effectiveness of the EU in terms of now this common front on the issues of security and foreign policy.
Well, I can only say that this division and this debate is also one among Americans. And it has been a division of the international community as such. And it is a great pity that it made the European Union process more difficult, because not everybody could agree that to go to war in March 2003 was the only way to deal with a problem we all agreed was a problem. But we also agreed that we should put what has been in the past into the past and look to the future. And we need to do that because the European Union and the United States are the two indispensable international partners to move global things forward.
Specifically peace.
Specifically is peace. And by the way, as I said in the beginning, the European Union is in itself a peace project. So no wonder that within the European Union, where so many wars have happened in Europe, there is a different attitude to war than there might be in other places.
Well, clearly this has placed a significant strain on U.S. and EU relations. What is the current opinion about the United States within the European Union?
Well, I mean, there has been a kind of exchange of caricatures on both sides, and we have to get over that. We have to recreate the trust in the transatlantic relationship. But this relationship is very solid, and the solid basis has not been affected by the geopolitical disagreements, because the solid basis is about this being the two major economies in the world. We exchange every day $3 billion in terms of goods, services, and direct foreign investment.
Well, clearly, when the U.S. acted unilaterally without the consent of the United Nations and perhaps the solid support of the European Union, that might have made a few people rather angry within the European Union.
Yeah, but I mean, we are on the side of those who believe that we have more important things to do than to reflect about the past.
So what's currently being done in your capacity as one of the highest-ranking ambassadors from Europe in building relationships with the United States? What are you currently doing to try to rebuild these relationships?
Well, we are just starting a new year. We will have a European Union United States Summit meeting in June, and we are preparing the agenda for that meeting. There will be other summit meetings. There will be a NATO summit. There will be G8 summit. The European Union US summit is in the very early part of June. And to come back to Iraq, which is part of what we call the Greater Middle East, we are preparing the way how to work together to approach
effort for rebuilding Iraq and
to approach the Greater Middle East in all its components. Iraq is a problem to be rebuilt. Afghanistan is not over. The Israeli-Palestinian conflict has not been solved, and this area of the globe is closer geographically to Europe than it is to the United States. So no wonder that we share the objective of doing what we can in order to make this part of the world more democratic, more prosperous,
and what exactly, if you can give us some explanations of some of the initiatives. I mean, you're talking in broader context, but in terms of your direct communication, for example, with the State Department and the White House, what are you really pushing for?
Well, I mean, first of all, we have continuous discussions with the State Department. We have a common agenda. We have not only the summit meeting. The summit is being prepared by what we call the senior level group, on which I sit, on which Undersecretary Larson sits for the State Department. We have ongoing political consultations where the senior person under the Secretary of State and his Deputy Secretary is Mark Grossman, who is the Undersecretary for Political Affairs. We are liaising with the White House, with the very important team in the National Security Council.
Condoleezza
Rice, Bob Blackwell, Dunfried and their collaborators. So it's an ongoing process. I have 20 bosses back in Brussels who are the members of the European Commission. One is the Trade Commissioner, the other one is the Foreign Affairs Commissioner, Chris Patton, Trade Commissioner Pascal Lamy. We're working with Bob Zoellick on trade issues, with Secretary of Commerce Evans on a number of economic issues, with Secretary Rich on Homeland Security issues. So the transatlantic agenda reflects all the areas on which the European Union has been able to come up with common policies. So when we have a case where we do not agree as a European Union, we try as hard as we can in order to overcome such a situation.
So in the future, do you think that the EU will be the common front on foreign policy, or do you think that we'll rely more on the transatlantic new transatlantic relationship?
Yeah, but
how does that work?
It's not a frontline discussion. It's not I said animals in the zoo looking at each other angrily. It is the fact that the United States as the world's most important power and the European Union as the comparable economy and the number 2 power, which has to equip itself with more diplomatic and security capabilities and clout, they are, as I said, the 2 indispensable partners. The United States has been called sometimes the indispensable nation. I would call the transatlantic relationship the indispensable relationship. And we have to build that partnership. It's an old concept. It has been coined by President Kennedy in 1962.
Speaking of which, I understand earlier in your career you played a very important role in the Kennedy round back in the formation of GATT and trade negotiations. And during that time period, the war on communism was a major concern. How would you compare the war on communism and, in current day, the war on terrorism?
Well, I mean, communism was the major threat, and we overcame it together. And we did not only overcome it by the threat